Welcome to lecture number 75, Historical Topic 7.7, the 1920s Innovations in Communication and Technology. There's one theme, and that's work exchange and technology. The learning objective for today is explain the causes and effects of the innovations in communication and technology in the United States over time. The first key concept is new technologies and manufacturing techniques helped focus the U.S. economy on production of consumer goods, contributing to improved standards of living, greater personal mobility, and better communication systems. For the manufacturing techniques, we have the growth of scientific management. Frederick Winslow Taylor, seen on the top left, is the one most closely associated with this technique. Because of that, it's also referred to as Taylorism. He was obsessed on how workers moved around in a factory and making sure that all of the things that they did were as efficient as possible. So he'd be hired as a consultant, and he'd made sure that the workers had all the tools in front of them to limit the amount of time lost in production. This is related to Henry Ford's use of the assembly line at the Ford Motor Company. An example of this is shown in the image on the top right. Workers don't actually have to move anywhere. They all have their parts and all their tools that they need and are responsible for one task along the assembly line process. They complete their one task, and then that product that is being continuously built gets passed on to the next person so that they can do their task. This dramatically lowered the price of consumer goods and the automobile for one. They built Model T Fords that dropped down in price so that they were affordable for everyone in the country. The spread of the use of electricity, which had been developed at the end of the 19th century, was more widely available. Because it can now power household appliances, Americans bought new refrigerators, vacuums, cleaners, dishwashers, washing machines, and it's mostly affecting the lives and the roles of women in the home. Since the tradition was still that women were homemakers, their job was made a lot easier by having an electric vacuum or an electric washer. This gives them more free time and that high standard of living that the key concept refers to. Women were able to spend leisure time doing other things. Some women used this free time to advocate in reform movements. As mentioned in the previous slide, the affordability of the Model T had a great impact in personal mobility. For the first 2 decades of the 20th century, a Model T sold for around $500. Compared to today's dollars, it would be anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on the year's inflation rate. Every part of the Model T was the same as every other Model T that was on the road. That's because they were all built on the assembly line, and customizing it in any way would slow down the process and make it more expensive. Henry Ford's famous line was that you can have it in any color you'd like as long as it's black. As the car took over as a major source of transportation, there's a shift to a reliance on oil as opposed to coal as our number one type of energy source. Coal was still used to heat homes, but the new reliance on the automobile starts the reliance on petroleum that still exists today. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone and the radio are the new major communication systems that tie the country closer together. These are explained further in the next key concept. New forms of mass media such as radio and cinema contributed to the spread of national cultures as well as greater awareness of regional cultures. The invention of the radio was incredibly helpful, initially as a communication tool in fighting World War I, and later as a form of entertainment. Big broadcasting companies were formed: ABC, the American Broadcasting Company, and CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting Services. They broadcast news stories, music shows, and dramatized stories out to the entire country through local affiliate radio stations. Everyone across the country had access to the same news, the same music, and shows. The man on the bottom right sitting next to a CBS microphone is actually Charlie Chaplin, a movie star during this time period. An example of a radio music show in this time period is the Grand Ole Opry. It was a live musical performance in Tennessee which played primarily country music. So the growth of the radio and the broadcasting of the Grand Ole Opry led to the spread of country music across the country. Charles Lindbergh became a national sensation when radio stations reported on his 1927 solo transatlantic flight from New York to Paris on his plane, the Spirit of the St. Louis. Everyone who had access to a radio all anxiously waited to hear his safe landing across the Atlantic. Lindbergh was an American celebrity all the way through the 20th century. In 1932, his family was the victim of a kidnapping ransom attempt that resulted in the death of his 20-month-old child. Lindbergh later became a controversial figure when we got into World War II. He became the face of an isolationist group that called for American neutrality. His primary fear was actually Soviet Russia. He thought that a defeat of Hitler would open up Europe to be taken over by communist ideology. In some of his speeches, he criticizes Jewish Americans for pushing for a war to stop Germany's persecution of Jews across Europe. In his personal writings, there are anti-Semitic remarks, but he was not actually praising any of Hitler's actions. Movies and cinemas also grew in popularity during this time. Initially, movies were silent and lasted between 8 to 15 minutes. The feature-length film is developed during this time by using multiple film reels to tell a story. The 1915 film The Birth of a Nation, mentioned in a previous lecture, was a pioneer in this respect. It was directed by D.W. Griffith, the most famous movie director of the time period. He makes Birth of a Nation on multiple reels to adapt the story called The Klansman. The movie glorifies the KKK and was responsible for the simultaneous resurgence of the KKK in 1915. The story has the KKK member as a protagonist and portrays African Americans in negative stereotypes. Some of the black characters in the film are portrayed by white actors in blackface. As much as Birth of a Nation was considered a breakthrough film in its influence of film, it was still a silent movie. Later on, movies in which actors' dialogue is heard is made possible by new technology. These types of movies were referred to as Talkies. The Jazz Singer was the first movie in which this happens. Though as seen on the screenshot from the movie, the main character was a black man portrayed by a white actor in blackface. Blackface was a performance tradition that was carried over from the minstrel shows in the late 1800s. White actors would portray black characters in a negative way, making them seem dirty, dumb, or evil. Because of this history, dressing up in blackface is insensitive and inappropriate if it were to be done today. Alright, here's the recap. New technologies are increasing in standards of living and communication. Automobiles are spreading throughout the United States due to their low prices and their ability to finance their purchase or pay over time. Radio and cinema expose Americans to the same media and generate a new national consciousness and culture. Aspects of regional culture are spread beyond their distinct regions, for better or for worse. Country music is pretty benign, but spreading the ideas from Birth of a Nation led to the KKK's resurgence. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, you can click the video link on the screen. And if you're looking for more practice to help you on the AP exam, you can visit apushslides.com. I wish you the very best in all of your studying and look forward to seeing you back in the next lecture.